So in this video we're going to be covering how to create a SAP HANA 1 system. So the first thing we're going to do is go through how to create an account. We're then going to look at creating a key pair, and I'll explain what a key pair is used for. Next we'll look at creating the actual SAP HANA 1 instance, then we'll start the instance, and lastly we'll look at modifying security groups so we can allow and open up ports for use by tools such as FTP, RDP, etc. So just to review what we've got, what we're going to have is two boxes. We're going to have a Linux box and we're going to have a Windows box. I'm only making this bigger because we're going to install a series of client tools on it. So this is our Linux box and this will be our Windows box. Now the Linux box is going to have SAP HANA 1 installed. So this is the box we're configuring now, which is obtained from the Amazon Web Services. Now on the Windows box we're going to install a list of clients because we want to be able to access the Linux box. One of the clients we're going to install is a tool called PuTTY. This is a tool that will be used to access our Linux server. You don't need to install it on this Windows box, but we're just going to install it just to keep things clean and put everything in one location. Now, obviously PuTTY will be then used to access our SAP HANA 1 instance and configure the server. So this is where we use our PEM file or our key pair. So a key pair comes to us in the format of a PEM file. It will have a PEM extension. So in essence you can call the key pair anything you want, but it must have a PEM extension. Now what we'll do is we're going to place the PEM file on our Windows box, but unfortunately PuTTY can't use a PEM file. So essentially we're going to use another tool to convert this PEM file to what's called a PPK or a private key format. This PPK will then be used by PuTTY to obtain access to our SAP HANA 1 server. So that's very straightforward. We're going to install PuTTY on the Windows box, which will use a PPK which is obtained by converting the PEM file, and then we'll be able to have access to our SAP HANA 1 instance. Essentially we'll log in as the root user, but the password, we won't have to type in a password because the password will be all contained within the PPK file. Now there's another reason why we'll need to use a PEM file, and that's because the way we're going to access our Windows box is using Remote Desktop. So you're going to have Remote Desktop installed somewhere. I'm using a Mac, but you don't have to use a Mac. You could use a Mac or a Windows box. And of course we're going to access the Windows box through Remote Desktop, and then we're going to access PuTTY on the Windows box to access our SAP HANA 1 server. Now of course we need to gain access to our Windows box, so you would need the name of the Windows machine. You're going to log in with the user administrator, but the question is, what is the password? Well, you obtain the password by passing the PEM file again to the Amazon Web Services, and it will return us a password. So this password will then be used in conjunction with the login to gain access to our Windows box, and then on the Windows box, after we've installed PuTTY, again we'll be able to access our SAP HANA 1 instance so we can do some more further configuration. So that's essentially why we need to generate the key pair, and the key pair is very important. You should really try not to lose that key pair. So now let's go through the concept of security groups. So security groups are very important because we're using various tools in our set of instances to access our SAP HANA 1 instance. So obviously firstly we're going to use the Remote Desktop to access our main Windows box. We're then going to use PuTTY to access our SAP HANA 1 instance. We're also going to have to connect not only PuTTY, but we're going to install Studio or SAP HANA 1 Studio on our Windows box. We're going to do this later on. And other tools, and because of that we're going to have to open up more ports. One of them, for example, is a JDBC port from our Windows box to our SAP HANA 1 instance. Lastly, we're even going to have an FTP server on our Windows box, and of course we're going to move content to our SAP HANA 1 instance, so we're going to have to open this port. So because we've got these various tools, JDBC, we've got Studio, we've got FTP, we've got Remote Desktop and PuTTY, we need to use a security group. So later on in this video we're also going to show you how to open up various ports so you can enable communication between your Windows and Linux servers. So why don't we get started with those demonstration videos.
In this video we're going to create a SAP HANA 1 instance using Amazon Web Services. So you can get to Amazon Web Services by simply doing a search on a browser for AWS, and we're going to connect to aws.amazon.com. Now what you'll need to do before you create a SAP HANA 1 system is create an account with Amazon Web Services. Once you've done that, log in with your account details, which I'll do now. Once you've got your login and password, you can log into your AWS account. So when you've logged in, this is the first screen that you'll see. So the first thing we need to do is go within our Amazon Web Services, is select our virtual servers within the cloud, which is under the heading of EC2. So when you've done that, what we're going to do now is firstly what's called create a key pair. So a key pair will be used, for example, if you're using a Linux system, in order to connect to that Linux system without having to type in a password. So to do this, what we need to do is scroll down our EC2 dashboard, and we're going to select here key pairs. So I'm going to create myself a key pair, and I'm going to give it a name which is SAP HANA Academy, like so, although it can be actually called anything. And then I'll click on create. What will then happen is that the key pair will be downloaded to your local machine, and in this video I'm using a Apple Mac machine, but it's essentially the same process if you're using a Windows machine as well. So now that we've got it, we should keep that key pair because we'll be using it later on to log into our SAP HANA 1 system. Now that we've got the key pair, we can go and create our instance. So to do this, we go to within our instances folder, we select instances. So in this video, we're going to create a SAP HANA 1 instance. So I'm going to actually say launch instance and select launch instance. We can use the classic wizard and we can click on continue. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to search for an instance. So we can do this by going to the fourth tab, which is AWS Marketplace, and I'll type SAP HANA 1 and click on go. So what will happen then is a new browser will open up, which will indicate that we can use this instance. And there's actually only one instance, which is a SAP HANA 1 instance on SUSE Linux. So now all we need to do is select that instance. And again, if we scroll down, we can see some information relating to that instance. Especially at the bottom, there are some important resource guides that you might want to use to guide you through troubleshooting any issues that you may have. Now, of course, depending on where you are, will depend on which region you want this instance based in. I'm based in the New York region, so I'm going to choose the US East Virginia region. But of course, that should automatically be decided upon by your account details. Here you can review information including the cost for the box. As you can see, it's about $3.50 an hour. And again, you can review actually what you're going to install. So essentially, this is only going to install revision 38 of the server-side products for SAP HANA. So now that we've done that, what we can do, we can click on continue. So what it's showing us here is that it will only cost us $3.49 an hour to keep this system running. But of course, if you're just playing with HANA and you want to get used to HANA, after you've used it for a few hours, it probably makes sense for you to turn that machine off. And here, because we've created that key pair, and we've only got one key pair, it's automatically selecting that key pair to be used in association with this system. If we want, we can configure any firewall settings, but I'm going to do this later on in the video. So now that we've actually selected our instance, all we need to do is launch it with one click. So the first stage is that it will confirm your subscription, just to make sure and confirm that you're subscribing to the software. The next stage is that the software will deploy on that EC2 box, and when we've got the tick mark, it means that the instance should start up. So now we can see it says that an instance of this software is now deploying on EC2. It'll give you a summary of the software installation details, such as it's going to be revision 38, deployed within the US East region. It's using a specific key pair setting, which we've already created. And again, later on, I'm going to configure any firewall settings so we can connect to this box from another machine. So once we can see that the machine's starting up, all we need to do now is go back to our home page. Go to our management console. Go back to our virtual servers in the cloud, the EC2. And within instances, what we should see now is that the instance is pending. It's starting up. So while the instance is starting up, I'll just pause the video. Just for you to know, it only takes around 10 minutes for the instance to start up. So I'll just pause the video while the instance is starting. So after a few minutes, we can now see that the instance is indeed running. And then I suppose the last thing we might want to do is name this instance. So we can do this by changing the settings of the screen, so I can choose which things I want to display for my instances. So for example, I'm going to turn off monitoring, status checks, type and AMI. Don't really need these options. Click on apply. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a name. So to do this, I just click where there's the green pencil, and I'm going to call this my HANA on Linux, HANA server on Linux. There we go, and then I'll click on save. So the only thing we need to do now is really deal with any security groups for this box. So by default, we're going to connect to this machine from a Windows box that we're going to create in another video, which will have the SAP HANA client on it. We'll also need to connect to the machine with JDBC, because we're going to deploy some software on a Tomcat application server. So to do this, we have to open certain ports. So to do this, we go to our security groups. And by default, there's the default group, which was there before you even create the SAP HANA 1 instance. But because we created the SAP HANA 1 instance, also an additional security group was created called the SAP HANA 1 Revision 38 security group. If we double click on that security group, and we just make this screen a little bigger, there we go, and we click on the inbound tab, we can see here which ports at the moment are open. Now by default, the only port that is open here is the SSH port, which is port number 22. But in order to use the HANA Studio, you need to open an additional 2 ports. So the way you add extra ports is you simply type the port range here. So I'm going to type 50013 to 50014. And if I don't specify a source, it essentially means that any machine can access based on this port range. But you can also specifically add it to a machine. So I'm going to add this rule, and then I'll apply the rule changes. Now there's a few more ports that we have to open. The first one that we have to open is port 21, because we're going to use FTP to connect to that port. Now you can either type the port in the port range, or you can simply select the port from the drop down box. So you can see SSH has been selected and the port for SSH is 20.